Hello. So I get to speak to you guys in that sweet spot after your coffee break and before your lunch, when you're relatively awake, which is pretty awesome. I think, get to be the first woman who's spoken today, which is something that I genuinely enjoy. I think that you guys should have had a lot more women, because a lot of the questions that have come up, I'm going to naturally answer them in the next 20 minutes and completely solve all our global problems. But the answer really is women and girls for literally every global challenge. And when we're talking about reimagining our social contract, I'm going to go back to when I was 12. I am one of 11 children. I'm the middle child. Now, some psychologists call that the radical middle. Some psychologists call that the malignant middle. We'd have to ask my parents which they prefer. I would hope the first. But when I was 12, I knew I had two kind of life purposes and goals. The first was to become a doctor, and the second was to own a yellow VW Beetle. These were my two life dreams. I managed to accomplish one, which was become a medical doctor. The yellow VW Beetle is still kind of my, that's when I know I'm done. That's when I know I can retire. But I knew I wanted medicine because every time I went into a hospital, I genuinely felt like that was the natural state of humanity, if that makes sense. When you ask most people what's the most holy place you can imagine, a lot of people will tell you a temple, a mosque, a church, a synagogue. For me, it was a hospital. The walls of a hospital have, I would argue, heard more prayer than any congregation. They have answered the call. And doctors, in the times of colonization, the general who colonized Morocco, Herbert Lotley, wrote back that doctors, and I'm paraphrasing, were the single best tool in pacifying and controlling a people. Medicine has always been a powerful tool. And those who provide it, those who provide health, have always been powerful in their own. And I knew at an early age I was going to be a doctor. As I got older, in my final year of medical school, I founded an organization which focused on security, and women's inclusion in security in particular. And a lot of people asked, how do those two worlds connect? And you'd be surprised at how much and how little they do. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question. If you go to the doctor with an infection on your arm, what does the doctor do? He'll debride it. He will literally go out and debride it to the very foundation of the infection. To make sure that it hasn't hit the bone, he will debride it. It's costly, it takes time, it's painful, it's intensive, but it's important. Because you literally go to the foundation of the problem. If he were to band-aid it and send you home, you would come back in a week or two and need an amputation. And so I always wondered, if doctors knew that you have to get to the root of a problem to solve it, then why in politics and security do we put band-aids on things and send them home? Why are we talking about a social contract as if it's realistic when our arms trade still makes and costs more money than health and education and infrastructure combined? How can we have countries that claim to have feminist foreign policies and still sell more weapons than anyone else? So my re-envisioning of the social contract is a little different, and it starts with redefining a very important word, and that's security. We all talk about security a lot. Our governments are very good at spending our tax dollars on security or blocking websites in the name of security. Now, there's been a trend since earlier than the 1980s and 90s, but that's when it really entered the political lexicon, of securitization. If you can think of any major global crises of the past 30 years, war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war on Ebola, there's the war on terror, the war on migration. Literally everything is securitized. And what securitization means in the political context is that a member of the elite within a community, oftentimes the government, more recently, given the changing nature of our nation state, this includes corporations and media, say this is an existential crisis. We have to put more money in this. We have to take away civil liberties to respond to this crisis. And now securitization is surprisingly reciprocated. An audience has to accept this. They have to say, yeah, this is an existential crisis. Sure, take away my civil liberties, tap my phone. This is totally legit. There's actually a lot more citizen participation than we would like to believe. Despite the fact that you're more likely to get killed by a flying asteroid than you were by Ebola if you lived in Chicago, there was still $8 billion spent in the span of 2 months, because that's securitization. Now, the reason securitization is important is because, as our previous speaker mentioned, when you govern by fear, it's easier to talk about the immediate. You work now, you get it done. It also is a byproduct of our political system. When you need to get reelected in 18 to 24-month cycles, you need to start getting your media out, you want quick wins. You want to say, I spent time and effort and energy on Ebola. You want to say, I kept the people of country X safe from whatever threat it was. Saying that you built X number of schools, that you invested this much in climate change action, really doesn't mean as much to people. It's not as sensationalized, it's not as exciting. Which brings in the important part. If we're really going to change the social contract, we have to recognize that it includes a very important group of people. And that's women. Now, how long, let me ask this so it's an easy answer. How many peace processes last 5 years or more? Less than 10%. 90% of peace processes fail within 5 years. Now, if we include women in those peace processes, how many last? If you include women, a peace process is 35 times more likely to last 15 years. 35 times more likely to last 15 years. Now, if you are a member of parliament or a citizen in that country, imagine what you can do in 15 years of peace and security. Imagine what you can do. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure. You can build the building blocks, what we know empirically are the building blocks of a peaceful and prosperous society. Not a robust defense system or surveillance, but basic human services. Which brings me to a second important point. How much do women, when they are employed, reinvest into their communities? Women reinvest 90% of their income into their community. 90%. How much do men reinvest? Just out of curiosity. Not to pick on you guys. A little bit to pick on you guys, but 30 to 40%. 30 to 40%. So in that 15 years where we've had women included in the peace building process, because naturally they solve all of our problems, and we've ensured that women are gainfully employed, they have reinvested 90% into their community. So now we have more robust systems and services. But in order for women to be gainfully employed, we have to do something first. We have to educate girls. And when we educate girls, if you educate 10% of the girls in a country, you're looking at a GDP growth of 2 to 3%. If you were to educate and employ the girls and women of the world equally, you're looking at a greater GDP growth than India and China combined. We all make a huge deal about China and India. We know the data. We should be making a much bigger deal about women. If you educate a girl, she's less likely to marry young. She's more likely to vaccinate her kids. She's more likely to have less children. Her kids are less likely to contract AIDS and HIV. In fact, the single greatest indicator for a secure and prosperous society isn't education or your economy or your military. It's actually the treatment of women and girls. Now, what makes this, I think, most interesting is that everything I'm saying, while I wish it were new and amazing and I came up with it, I didn't. We've had this data for years, and we've done almost nothing with it. We've had it for years. We get really excited about things like AI, or when it comes to climate change, for example, things like new technologies. Everybody wants to talk about new energy and new technology. The number one solution for climate change action, researched only in these past 3 years by Paul Hawken and his team at Drawdown, was girls' education and women's reproductive rights. It's not as sexy as energy, new energies, new technologies. It's definitely not as cool as like these private islands. I'm only saying that because I really would like a private island. I would prefer if it were free, but it's a lot more practical and realistic. So in my redefining the social contract, I would genuinely hope that instead of us always looking at X, Y, and Z, we start looking at the very beginning, the ABCs. And we start talking about basic services, the provision of basic services, how we're going to meet that need, and the reality that without the inclusion, participation, and leadership of women and girls, we're not going to do anything. We can go to Mars, believe me. We'll mess it up like we've messed up Earth. And we can continue to talk about AI. But the reality is, AI it learns from humans. We can talk about different institutions, religion, for example, politics, corporations. And the reality is, those are all shaped by the men who lead them. Literally everything, from education, from healthcare, from religion, literally everything with the leadership and authority of women at the helm is completely transformed. And until we have that conversation legitimately, any other conversation about social contracts is unrealistic. Thank you.